Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the third session of Accelerating into Leadership. We have Brother Atif Jaleel joining us today. And a bit of background with Brother Atif Jaleel. It's interesting because I met Atif many, many years ago. In fact, when I first got into teaching at a gathering that he had organized with all these teachers at a restaurant in Ilford called Pandu's. And mashallah, Atif was very passionate about education at the time, and I was quite intrigued to sit and listen to him. Atif's background is he started off as a teacher of maths, and mashallah, he did really well as a teacher of maths. But then he progressed on to becoming a head of department, a very successful head of department. He managed to develop his teams wherever he worked. He managed to obtain excellent results for the students that who he was serving. But not just that, his experience isn't just constricted to the United Kingdom. He's also progressed and worked abroad, namely in the UAE and in Egypt. And he, again, has worked in a variety of settings whilst he was there. He then came back to the UK and then took up lecturing primary school teachers, specializing in maths. He was a senior lecturer. Yeah, go ahead, Atif.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. I'm going to stop you there because I'm going to fill you in with, and everyone else, about what I've done as the actual session continues. Because otherwise, and as we discussed yesterday, and you know me quite well, I'm going to run over for sure. So
I've got 2 more points, Mr. Jaleel.
Go on.
So after he did his senior lecturing training primary school teachers, he then supported teachers to enter the profession through the organization called GEMS. He's now trying to complete his PhD at the University of Cambridge, and he's basing this on international comparative education, focusing mainly on competent teaching of mathematics in Qatar and the UK. And that's pretty much my introduction, Mr. Jaleel. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Because I can't see anyone else.
I can hear you.
Okay,
Everyone
cool.
else is on mute at the moment.
Right. Okay, cool. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salam to Salim. I haven't seen him for a while, but he has messaged me in private. It's good to see he's here as well. Let me know at any moment in time if this doesn't work well, and then we can shift. Can you see this? You can't see this. You can't see this.
Yeah, you need to share your screen, right?
I'll share my screen first. There we go. And then come over here, share, and that's that. So you can see that. Yeah,
I can see your screen. Perfect.
Okay. All right. So by the way, can we? The house rules, I think, would be, I think that we should have a open discussion about what's going on here, and so don't wait until the very end, because if you were anything like me, you're going to forget your points. So do raise a hand, get hold of Shoaib's attention somehow or another, especially if it's concerning a particular slide and you don't understand something, let me know, and then put your hand up, and then we'll try figuring it out at the end of the slide. Just the way that we would have done if we were in a university lecture or something on those lines. Okay, so what do we wish to cover? You know, they say that to you in schools all the time, so make sure that everyone knows what the goals are, learning objectives. So what we'd like to do is agree terminology. The background to this talk was that we, all the speakers, I think, were pretty much given a title. And I think purposefully it was left a little bit open, and through discussions with Shoaib, it was left a little bit open because we wanted to know that we had freedom to understand what it is that seems to be facing education and Muslims and Muslim educators at the same time. And I thought that what we'd want to do is not assume anything first. We'd like to go through the terminology and look at that. Look at the success and failures when we look at the reflection of a team. Changing a mindset, I hope that kind of occurs all the way through. It certainly has for me, even just writing this. And how does everyone else do it? You know, we're sitting here thinking, I certainly have come across people who think that they know how to do it well. And they do, you know. Hats off to them, they do in that particular setting. But what if you move? What if you go to a different school? So how does everyone else do it? Are your skills going to be able to be moved? Are they transferable? Building capacity, we'll come back to that. That kind of ties in with the changing mindset. Diversity within our teams, and I point over here, this is not about race, this is about skills-based. And is this a new idea, or have Muslims been doing this for a while? So, okay, so I don't think it's a new concept. That's my first point. I think that this is something that's been going on for a while. We all know about marriage apps, some more than others. And they've kind of hit off quite a lot. You know, in the olden days, you'd have eHarmony and a few others. I've forgotten their names. And then you had the Muslim ones, Single Muslim, and I think Shadi.com and a few others. In essence, what are they trying to do? I think what they're trying to do is create a team. You put in some information. They give you some suggestions. But what are the suggestions based on? So there's an algorithm in the background. There's some kind of computer formula that's working and trying to connect people together. In reality, what are they trying to do? Try to create a team that works. They don't want people to say, "Oh yeah, we got married and then we kind of fell apart." That's not going to do great for them. So getting people together is going to be the key aim. But it isn't new. There's a chap called Marcus du Sautoy. You may have heard of him. Oxford lecturer, professor, mathematics. And he plays for this team called Recreativo Hackney. Now, in around 2006-ish, he thought, we're not doing very well. We're going to try doing better. And suggested to his team and his coach that they're going to change the numbers on the back of their shirts. And so they changed them. And he took inspiration from Real Madrid. So if you recognize those names and around that kind of era, you know the people who I'm referring to. Carlos, Brazilian, he had number 3 on his shirt. Zidane had 5, Raul 7, Ronaldo 11. This is the old Ronaldo. Beckham 23, and even at Man U, Beckham had a number 7 shirt. For those mathematicians amongst us will notice that those are all prime numbers. He just had this idea that if you have prime numbers, you will do well, because the key players at Real Madrid had prime numbers. Lo and behold, he does it. And within that season, they get, I think, promoted into the first division. It's been great. Again, not a new concept. Trying to make an effective team isn't a new concept. And this term about effective team, if anyone knows anything about me and films that I've been watching in my life, you will recognize possibly the Tom Cruise statement. Are you an effective, well, the Mission Control asks him, are you still an effective team? The effective team part is a running theme here. And everyone seems to be wanting to do it because we collaborate on lots of different fronts and we want to do well. Why wouldn't we? The title that we've been given, you've seen on the posters, is reflection. It has the term reflection in it. And I thought there is, and this is my underlying belief, and I'll say this now so that we can refer to it later on. I don't think anything that comes in education hasn't been covered by people before. We're not that good. I think we need to get off our high horses on that point. And especially as Muslims, we tend to look at our great role models, the golden age, and the Sahaba before that, and the Prophet before that, and other Anbiya. There is stuff already in the Deen and from people from before who have done well, and I think we should take inspiration from them. Now, coming back over here, the Abu Hurairah quotes the Prophet. It says said as if he was saying it. I'll correct that later. But a believer is the mirror of his brother, and when he sees something bad in it, he should correct it. That's what we're doing. We're a reflection of each other. That's a concept in Islam. But let's go further. If this is a concept in Islam, if we are a reflection, and that kind of makes us feel a little bit strange. Oh my God, I'm going to be in reflections. You know, this has a bad impact on me. We will have heard of phrases like, heard phrases like birds of feather flock together. I know my mum said that to me a lot when I was young. What did they mean by this? What does anyone mean by this? And it makes you sit up and think, I'm going to be judged based upon the people around me. So that becomes difficult. But what exactly is it that we're finding difficult? How do we wish to be perceived? And I'd like you to think about that and see and think, how would you like to be perceived? So take a minute or so and think about how would you like to be perceived. I'll stay quite while I think admin fixes friends who might be on. If you've got any questions, any suggestions, do please mention them.
Okay, just watching the chat box for yourself, Mr. Jaleel.
Do I look at the chat box, and how do I do that?
No, you don't worry about that. I will manage that for you.
Excellent. Okay. If anyone says anything, let me know.
Yeah, sure.
I'll count down.
So Sister Zainab has said loving and caring person.
Okay. Remember, we're trying to think about, this is leadership. We're in a leadership program in that sense. We're not thinking about how they want us to see us in our personal lives and otherwise. And if you mean it in a leadership role, interesting. I'd like you to expand on that a little bit if you could.
Sister Sadia has said organized and decisive.
Interesting. That is interesting. You know, I wish we had a board. We'd write all of these down. We'd come back to them, refer to them a little bit later on.
Mm-hmm.
I had, and I'll just stop some of you who may be typing at the moment. I had this discussion with some other people, and the things that they wrote, so I've written them over here, is that they'd like to be tight. It's a phrase that comes from the 90s, I suspect. They want to be strong. They want to be close together. They want to be empathetic. They want to be seen as people who can relate to.
Sister Sina has said, Brother Atif, to be firm and fair. Rana has mentioned approachable, humble, and firm. Amal has mentioned fair and treats people on merit.
Okay.
Some good points coming through.
Very nice points. And some of the ones that I might mention are probably going to cross over. So going back to what some of the other people suggested was that they want to be empathetic, they want to be supportive to all, they want to be inclusive, they want to be successful. And the list continued. I mean, I've only written a few of these, but the list continued, and you're adding lots more to them. But what do these words mean? If I say, for instance, successful, what does successful mean? And I think, you know, we should have a think about that, and maybe possibly pause and think, what do we mean by that? I'm just going to quickly bring up some notes that I wrote down beforehand. I'll just leave them there on my phone. So think about, what do you think successful means? I'm probably going to give you some of my answers as it is anyway.
So brother, so I'm not sure if it's a brother or sister. Rana's mentioned make a change. Sister Amal definitely has good judgment.
I think they're still answering my previous question.
That's right.
What successful means. So let's move on to what successful and effective teams might be. So what is a great team? That's a question. What is a great team?
Amira's come in and said a successful team is somebody or a bunch of people who are achieving the goals you set out to achieve.
Okay, so
help people to better their own craft. Sister Zainab has mentioned.
Okay, fine. So you're going. Some of your points there from our friends on here at the moment in time have suggested things that are more about mentoring, how we're going to make people better. But does great then? So I've mentioned, say, for instance, great. Does great mean that there is something measurable, that we have to be able to measure this stuff? My other questions to you in terms of effective teams is, how do you build one? Can you build one? You know, I've heard many people say, oh, I've come in, I've inherited a team, they're not working so great. Unfortunately, what can I do? That's the reaction you get. And they'll say this to their line managers, just the way that is. You know, that person just doesn't seem to get it. And so does that mean that we just give up? And if it does mean that we give up, what does that say about us as educators? That's the idea that we hold, that people are fixed, they can't change, they're not going to be able to grow. So we go down the capability route, as opposed to saying, no, I think everyone can do well. It reminds me of something in mathematics, and those who are mathematicians probably be able to relate to this. There is this thing that especially in primary school, we get this a lot. People come up to you and say, oh, you know what, little Johnny's not very good at maths, you know, but it's okay because I wasn't very good at maths either. As if it's a genetic issue, you know, being bad at math seems to just kind of flow through your genes. But their mindset, I tell you, it gives you a glimpse into their mindset. Their mindset is that I can't do any better. This is as good as it's going to get, quoting another film. And we can't build. And if that's the idea that we have for people who are adults, then are we having the same for children? If we don't, then there's a contradiction. And if we go with that, no, they can change, then we've got to ask ourselves, how do we build them? How do we develop them? How do we make them better? And this, I think, is a key role for SLT. By the way, show of hands. Oh, we can't do that, can we? Show of hands. Who here is, have we got a mix, Shoaib? Have we got a mix of people in terms of positions they've got?
Yes, Brother Atif, we got people, majority of the people in this group are from an early years of primary setting. Majority of the people in this course are females. We've got 125 registered participants, 70% of them are female.
Okay.
Majority of people, sorry, not majority, combination of people from all over the world. I think about at least 10 countries above. So yeah, we've got a quite mixed, diverse
Okay.
group.
So do keep speaking to Shoaib, by the way, because it's nice to know where you come from and your kind of positions. Because if you're, and I don't want this to be just about people who are at headship level or deputy headship level or assistant headship level. I think that there are other friends that I've got who will be able to tell you a lot more about that than I will be able to. This is more, it's more wholesome in that sense. We're going to talk about leadership at every single level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so going back to effective teams, what are they? So we need to understand how to define these terms. What is success and what is, whoops, I've got some notes over here. What is successful? And if we're saying we're effective, what are we effective at? How does that work? The leadership of these teams, how do they become better? And I'm reading out the slides, I appreciate that. But I'm leaving these things out there because I want them to be questions for you guys to be able to interact with. But I'm going to skip all the way down to the bottom part because I think this is quite important. When we say teams, remember we're talking about reflection, we're talking about and what that kind of means. We're talking about teams and how they will be a reflection upon us. Who is in the team? We always seem to assume that the team is about our peers. So if I'm a head of department, then it's the other head of departments partly, and it will also be my math teachers, and those will be. And I will refer to maths quite a lot, by the way, because of the maths background. They will be part of my team, but I think that that's not the full team. I think that because of the way that we work and the research that we have, actually, team is slightly bigger than this. And have we considered that maybe parents are part of the team? Certainly in this lockdown situation during the pandemic, we are a lot of us have started doing teaching online. If you haven't, if you're a parent, then you've been accessing possibly Oak National Academy and things of that nature. And so the parent is sitting there, but they've got that TV thing on and watching lessons, and you're pausing it whenever they tell you to. But now the parent has become a shareholder within the actual within this team. And when we look at things like flipped learning, and we tell children to go home and they kind of do some of their learning there beforehand, they come back and we build on top of that. The idea that they're now taking part in their education suggests that they might be part of the team. So when we come down to making decisions, we're not taking them into account. We're not taking the children into account, certainly not taking the parents into account. And yet even research suggests the fact that if you have parents on board, the children will do better. They will achieve better. Again, we've got to define what achievement is, but they will do better in terms of behavior, possibly, certainly grades. And yet we don't seem to define them as part of the team. I think maybe we're missing a trick here. I think we need to think about that. Certainly, if you've got any views on this, Shoaib's your man. But we should be thinking about them as a more wider team than just what we have in front of us, because our influence, and this is from an Islamic point of view, there are lots and lots of books Islamically about education. I would argue with anyone who suggests the fact that actually we've only got a couple of people who've written something and that's it. There are lots and lots of lessons to be taken. You can listen to things like talks from Numan, Ali Khan and Yasser and so on, and they will refer to the way that a teaching incident seems to have occurred with Luqman in the Quran and a few other parts, and you think, wow, that's a really good gem. Or the way the way that Allah has put something in the Quran, and you think, oh wow, that's a bit of a lesson there to be learned. I think that we need to look at what Islam seems to say about this. It's certainly what our scholars seem to say about this, and what their ideas about this as well. They don't restrict it just to their particular team, because most of the team work wasn't quite the way that we do teamwork here now. They don't have large departments running in the same kind of way. There was a particular person, I forget his name, based in Tunisia a while back, and he was talking, and he, as a parent, he was making decisions about which people will be teaching his children. And so he takes the responsibility. He knows what he has. He's going to be answerable to Allah about the children and what they've learned. And as a parent, he's making that decision. So I think that they're all becoming a bigger team. I think I'll touch on this in a little bit later as well. Hold that for a second. Just quickly check. No, I'm going to go back to it. Okay, another thing that I'd like to mention at this point is, I'll probably come back to this later on because I've forgotten where I put it on the slides. But when we've got international comparative tests, which is stuff that I've looked at now, and it's changed a lot of policy in England, the curriculum changes and the fact that you'll learn your times table and so on. What seems to be evident is that when we look at other successful countries, certainly someone like China and Japan, they have this idea, lesson study, if you've come across this before, they sit together and they plan, and then they go through this cycle of planning, and then they'll assess, and then they'll teach, and then they'll assess, and then they'll carry on doing this all the way through, and they'll do better and better and better, and so they've got this great amount of, they've got an expertise kind of thing at the end. When Singapore maths, for instance, came in, they started writing books. When they write books, they are not just they're not written in the same way that we would have, say, Pearson or Oxford University Press writing them. There is a team of people who include people other than just practitioners. They are including practitioners, but they're also including people who are very, very good at their subject, lecturing-wise. They'll have PhDs and so on. And then also ITT, initial teacher training people. So there's this whole nice group of people who bring lots of differences, and they put it into the pot, and then they discuss it. And I think maybe that's what this parents and children part should be doing as well, from our point. When we when we've got a team that's really doing really, really well, so if you're Guardiola going over to Germany, then yeah, that makes things easier. But if you're not, and you've come into a slightly difficult situation, or you're trying to improve on what you have already, because we can't say that it's perfect all the time. Suzanne says, and this is some research, and I will refer to some research because I think that a lot of times when I've spoken to research, and even myself, I'm guilty of it. When I was in school, someone would come up to me and say, "By the way, have you seen this research paper?" And everyone's like, "Oh no, look, that's a different area, there's a different place, different kind of school, they've got a different setup. It doesn't affect me." It does, because that research may not be particular to you 100%, but it isn't being collected by looking at a couple of people. It isn't just one school that they tend to look at most times. They will look at quite a lot of people. In some cases, the research will consist of 20,000 children that they've interviewed. So some of your children will be like them, and some of your teachers will be like the ones that they were interviewed. So I think research does have a really good position in our education and informing ourselves as well.
Brother Atif, can I ask you a question? I mean, I know you've alluded to quite a few sporting examples, but can we, as aspiring school leaders or school leaders in general, can we learn anything from sporting examples when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, you'll notice that I speak a lot about sporting analogies. The reason I do this is because if we're in a school, we may have the opportunity to look at some of the other departments and see how well they're doing or not so well, and we can learn from each other. But my experiences haven't been that way. I think in secondary, certainly, it's very, very it's tight. It's difficult. Your deadlines are always upon you, so you tend to just sit in your own room. I mean, how many people are sitting around in the staff room? Most of the schools that I've visited, people don't have time. They'd like to. When I was a teacher, we'd find time, but now different demands. The scene in schools changed a little bit, so I don't think you get the opportunity to see them. So when we refer to sporting teams, that is probably a very good example of a bunch of people working together, and then you can criticize how well they do and how well they don't do. And if there's one person who's not doing so well, does that have an impact on the rest of the team? So to answer your question straight, the reason I'm talking about it is because I think it's something that everyone can share. And I'm not going to think that none of the sisters are watching football, cricket, and so on. My assumption is that actually sport now takes a really high profile in everyone's lives. So we'll be able to refer to it. If you don't understand one of them, I'll try to explain what the point I'm getting to, especially when I say Guardiola going to Germany, because he inherited a team that was doing well anyway. Okay, so, and he's a manager. Okay, so a team's success often depends upon its composition. So Suzanne Bell says that what a team consists of has a very big direct impact on how it succeeds. And that kind of makes sense, Why wouldn't? If you've got people who are not able to build a TV, and yet that's the business you're in, if they're not very competent in doing so, then you're not going to succeed in making lots of TVs or TVs that last for a long time. So if you've got people who are amazing engineers, of course it's going to happen. But that's if you've got a great team already, and you've got people who have your team composes of great people already, or people who are going to do great for you, whatever the measure is. But how do you make it better? And she suggests that we should go with the ABC. You'll notice that I've misspelled attitudes. So I did correct that yesterday, and I've still left it out. So attitude. So A is attitudes. You've got to have a good attitudes. B, behaviors. How you behave amongst each other, within the team, and the cognitive state. And we'll mention cognitive states in a bit. This does depend on context. Clearly, if you are going to want to create a new device, and I've mentioned TVs, you want people who think outside the box. You don't want people who just kind of get on with the job because they're meant to think of something else, folding TVs and so on. If you've got people who think about very static stuff, you're just going to get the normal TV with the big, box at the back. But if you want to be effective, then diversity, I think, is critical. And I agree with Bell on this point. Success also hinges on somebody's mood. If you have a person within the team who doesn't seem to be doing so well, or isn't happy because they're not doing so well, so let's not stop pointing the finger. They're not happy. That might then start having an effect on other people. It makes sense. Rotten apple and barrels. And you want to fix that situation. So the success of a team also hinges on people's moods. And we'll hold that thought in a moment because we'll refer to it later on, certainly at the very end when we talk about the Islamic side. Bell is also working with NASA. So this building teams, and we mentioned this earlier in the very beginning, is a new concept. Bell is working with NASA to build an algorithm where if you measure certain characteristics and you put them in, you'll be able to see whether some team members are going to be able to work well with other team members, because you're going to be in space for quite a long time. You don't want to be getting into fights because nowhere to go. You get angry at each other. You go to the other side of the spaceship, and I'll go to the other side of the spaceship. It's not going to work.
Can I ask, Atif, you mentioned that there needs to be diversity in teams. Are you referring to the build-up of people in terms of what they look like or where they come from?
I will come to diversity in a minute. It'll probably be the next slide after this. Okay. But it is, just quickly to answer your question, I wouldn't want to leave it there. Diversity isn't about race or gender. I don't want people to say, oh, it's a math team and we've only got, one woman working, so we've got to now work and get another person. Unless that is your aim, unless you think that getting another female member of staff is going to help, certainly in the maths department, it worked wonders for us. But that wasn't the reason why any of our, in my department at the time, were picked. They were picked because they were really good. But they came because of the fact that they were female. It brought extra merits to the team, extra dimensions. But diversity isn't about that. Diversity is about skills. Okay, we'll mention that in a bit. Okay, so teamwork. So we mentioned teamwork. We think teamwork is really good. I think we're all on board on that. But there is another term I want to introduce you to, and that's called taskwork. Taskwork is the work that teams must do to complete a mission. So it's the bit that you get done because you want to get this overall objective completed. And teamwork is the thought process, the feelings and the behaviors of the team that help them work together. So you could have good teamwork and not a great result, and that's acceptable. If you had taskwork, you would have taskwork without great teamwork because you were very focused on getting the job done. My question here is, which one are you promoting? So in your practice normally, take a moment, sit back, close your eyes, you still hear my voice. Just think about which one do you push when you're in a position of authority and leadership? Do you want people just to get the job done, or do you want everyone to do it together? And which one is more important for us? I suspect, I'm looking at my own self at times, my colleagues will tell you that it was taskwork. We had to get jobs done, and there are other dilemmas that face us. There are other constraints, deadlines, time, And so we don't have that. Teamwork becomes a luxury at some stage. But if we're talking about that being a luxury and we're just going to carry on as per normal, then what are we doing here? I have to ask that question to yourselves and myself. What are we doing here if that's what we think? That there are too many constraints, we can't break them, and so we're just going to carry on like we do. And yes, if it is taskwork, it is taskwork. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that you've got longevity in here. Team cognition, we mentioned this before, cognitive states. Team cognition is what allows team members to understand each other intuitively. So if you've ever played computer games, I've tried. One of my friends, Mr. Raja, is very good at playing games. He's tried to help me, and we sit there on numerous consoles playing Call of Duty, and he'll say, go that direction and you come this direction. It's like an army soldier type thing. And I'm pants. I'm really, really bad at this. He cannot trust me to make a good move. He doesn't intuitively know what I'm going to do next. Probably because I don't know what I'm going to do next either. But that's not a great way to be, and what makes a great team, and you might have seen people in, sorry, with the iPad keeps going off. My niece is messaging me, or messaging my missus, it's her iPad. You might have seen in football, team players, they kind of like go like that, and yet the ball goes in the opposite direction. They just know. Or in a running play, someone's going to kick the ball way near the goalkeeper and gets it very much in line with where the striker is. If you think about that, that is, from a psychological point of view, that is there's a lot of factors going on over here, a lot of variance. You've got lots of different people in the middle who are trying to stop the other people getting ahead. And then somehow this person at the back just thought that someone at the front was going to make a move. And so when he kicks the ball, they will instinctively get the ball and then go on to score a goal or do something damaging to the other team. That is team cognition. And that's, I think, the way that you'd like to work. In a school setting, I knew, certainly when I look at my examples, and you guys are more than, I'd be very happy for you to share them, I would know that my team, it wasn't one individual, my team would have my back any moment in time. They could come in and say we had an emergency, we're not going to get to school on time, and I've got 3 lessons on the go. I'm going to be busy all the way through until lunchtime, and then I've got a meeting afterwards. I would know instinctively what they're going to do. Not because sometimes that I know them so well, and that's part of it, but also because we've had discussions beforehand. We've talked about these things, and this will be a factor in being successful as a team afterwards, about the prep work beforehand, and then maybe you've gone through some difficult times, and so you know what happens because you did it badly one time, or the rest of the team didn't react the way that you wanted to, and then you have a discussion about it. That, I think, is called communication, and we'll come back to that in a bit. You mentioned diversity, so we'll come to it now. So diversity is seeking innovation, creativity. If you're seeking creativity and innovation, like I was talking about the TV, I've got a TV right over here, I keep pointing to it. Diversity is beneficial, really important. But there is a caveat to this. It does take people who are diverse longer to come together and gel together. And the reason being is because they're not all on the same page. They're not on the same hymn sheet. They're not singing from the same hymn sheet. And so because that there is a difference in the beginning, it will take them time to come together. And so diversity, although helps you in certain parts, it takes time to get together and gel together. And the key thing here is trust. I'm sure I've got a really good graphic here. I haven't used it, unfortunately, but it shows people holding hands and kind of helping someone else over a cliff edge. Trust is paramount. Focusing on shared goals, and this is what Feitosa says, focusing on shared goals really help to develop that trust. If you can sell your vision and everyone's agreed upon it, then I think we're going to do well. If you're going to say to somebody, hear and obey, if you're going to ask people to listen, hear and obey, and do exactly what you say, and they're like, but, no, look, we've got time, the management's asking me for something, and it needs to be done by yesterday. I'm sorry, I don't care what you say, I'm still going to do it. You're not building trust. Don't expect them to have your back when you're not in early in the morning. You're seeking out all of the innovation, creativity that there might exist, and they're never going to go on the same page because you're not allowing it. You're not allowing the discussions to occur. And if you don't do that, how do you expect them to sell your product, to sell your idea to other staff members, to other students? if you're not even allowing them the space to have this conversation. I think Atif wants to talk.
So I was curious if you'd be interested in a
I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
You can, okay.
Just trying to.
I just just got highlighted when.
Yeah, somebody accidentally unmuted
That's all right. That's fine. That's cool. I thought if they had something to say, it'd be really good to hear from. So I think that we need to share that idea and not just develop an environment where you do as I say because I know best. Looking back at research, so CPD, Armour and Yelling, they did some research, and it was about some historians, history teachers in America, and they went on a course and they did some CPD stuff, and they were asked about CPD, and they said, why define CPD as going on a course? But when they delved into the actual answers, they realized that actually what they're really talking about is the way that they learn from each other, the informal learning that occurred from each other, and that's what they defined as CPD. And you think, oh, that's interesting. And so CPD does have a place. I know that a lot of times when we have inset days, I know I was probably one of the most annoying people there and would sit at the back and probably talk to each other and amongst my other mates, because we were mates in our teams and wider teams as well, not just restricted to our subjects. But CPD does have a place, and I think that we should use that, we use that well. Delegation, I tell Shoaib this all the time. He finds it difficult, but delegating is really important. If you don't delegate, then you're in essence saying that without me, nothing works. Please don't say that. Even if you believe it, don't think it. We're going to change our mindsets here. Remember one of the early points, changing mindset. You can't think that because that isn't true. If you delegate, things are much more manageable. You are able to then focus on key aspects, the key goals, agreed goals. Remember, we're going to agree everything in the shura kind of style with your fellow peers and teachers of whichever level that you're at. If you're middle management, if you're in primary and you're talking about your key stage teachers, if you're in the same year group, you're looking at year one planning for English, maths, and foundation subjects, then you come together and you have a shared idea and you delegate. And that isn't that delegation. If you have a 3-form entry, most times in primary schools, we'll have somebody doing maths and someone else doing, or numeracy, and somebody else doing English, literacy, and somebody else doing foundation subjects. And that's delegation. If one person was doing all of it, I know from my students in the past, they find it difficult. So I think it's a good thing to do. If we are going to do that, we've done the delegation part. Okay, we've delegated. Coming back to Islamic point of view, this is what used to happen when we were looking at as Muslims, they were expanding in the empire. You couldn't be in more than one place at one time. So governors were listed in lots of different areas, and they were made accountable. So even though these two people might be very good friends, and there's another lesson to us, even though two people might be very good friends outside of school, but when you're doing a professional job, and so you got to make sure that there is some a fine line in both people's minds that tell you that you can't just skip, you can't cut corners, you can't skip on jobs just because you're friends. And there's a famous instances with Khalid bin Walid being asked to be accountable, and he said, I don't want to be accountable twice. Allah's going to do it once and you're going to do the other one. You can find out more, and there's more learned people here who can tell you more about it. So if we say that we've got all of the things before, we know that we want to be successful, we want to be an effective group. How do we become an effective group? Now, this section has been taken from the NCSL slides, so in senior leadership and so on. It's a group of people who've written, so I got that, Castillo and Brown, Earley and Weinding, Wallace and Hall and Wagerman. These are the things that they said are present and are in common with all of their findings. So people who work well together are going to do well. I mean, that's, I don't think we need to explain that any further. Communicate, and remember, we mentioned this in the beginning, we've got to be able to communicate our ideas. If we're not, then we're doing that. I say it, you do it, that's it. That was probably the way that my parents at some stage probably thought they should be bringing me up. And maybe they were right at that stage, but that's because they didn't understand stuff. And a lot of child psychology now focuses on the fact that you have discussions with children and you try to get them on board, make them understand what it is, rather than just do it because I said so. Those children don't seem to understand. And it's not good for them even later on. Key policy decisions are consulted upon. Don't just do it on your own. You have this idea where you sit down together like a shura and you face differences. I'm not sure whether I spoke about conflict yet, so I'll talk about it in a bit. But having differences isn't an issue. You'd like people to do it. It's in, and I keep going back to Islam because that's what should be guiding us. But it's in Islam anyway. There are lots of differences. There are fiqh issues that are different. You know, where you're going to bind your hands and so on, or how you're going to pray Eid prayer. There are lots of differences, and they're acceptable. Don't shy away from them, but discuss them. Bring them out into your meetings, and then face them. Don't hide away from them because you think that person's going to be a little bit better at articulating their point, and you don't feel as confident. Create that safe space. The other thing another characteristic of this great SLT, this is all, remember, not leadership in the wider context, it's very much education, is that they focused on teaching and learning. They were very much aware of recent pedagogy, and they were interested in wider issues and not just not just getting grades. It wasn't just about getting grades. And a lot of successful head teachers certainly will tell you that when we have our eye on the ball, on not just getting A's and A stars and or 9s and 8s and so on, or levels and so on. We're not doing that. We're actually thinking about the person as a wholesome, as a whole. That's what we're going to try to develop. Then that's when they seem to do better. I was going to go off track there a minute. Develop positive relationships with school community. The school community is not just us in terms of teachers. It is wider than that. It is the admin staff. It is the people who are helping take care of the school and make sure that it is in a good, safe working order. And then it goes beyond. And we spoke about parents, and we talk about neighbors, and it's all of them, and it's local businesses. It is every single person. And I know a lot of primary schools tend to do this already, and we talk to people outside, but it is a characteristic of an effective SLT. Recognize and value work of others. Know that when somebody does something and the hard work that they put in, that it should be recognized. He who thanks the people thanks Allah. We should be saying thank you, even if the job hasn't been done in the way that you want it to. That's not a prerequisite to say thank you. You know, it's almost like when it's your birthday and someone gives you a present and it's not what you wanted. You don't turn around and slap the hand away and say, "Oh, didn't want that. Thank you very much, but no thanks." No, it's the thought that counts. They put in the hard work. It's the effort. So to value it, and if you do, then they will carry on doing more for you. Set high expectations. That's not a bad thing. So so if anything before I've mentioned suggests the fact that you shouldn't have high expectations, no. Definitely have high expectations, but be sensitive to the moods of people. You know, if someone's just had a tragedy in their home and you're expecting them to come tomorrow morning and still, I don't know, produce the test papers that they were meant to do over the weekend and they couldn't do it, be sensitive to it, to their mood, to their morale, and to the workload that you're putting on top of them. And undertake training. As educators, I find this hilarious. I don't know why there is, or there used to be, I don't think there is so much now, but there used to be an idea that I've done my learning. I remember some of the teachers that I had, they would have said something along the lines of, "It doesn't matter to me because I've already got a job. It's here. I've already done my GCSEs. I've already done my A-levels. I've already done my Key Stage 2 exams and so on. But yeah, if you don't work, then you're going to fail." That where did that come from? Like, how did that become an idea, an Islamic idea that we would develop? It isn't. We would have to learn and work on that, and that should be a continuous thing. We're in education. If we're teaching other people what they don't know, and we're assuming that we know everything, along with that, it isn't just good. It isn't just like, don't be like the old me, where I'd have stacks of books behind me, and they would look very pretty, but we didn't read anything. And we didn't take anything on board. And if we did, it would still be the idea of like, well, I've got it done, so I've done the teaching. It isn't about just getting the teaching done. It's about reflecting upon it. So reflect upon how well you did it. Maybe I know you want to come in here. I can't hear you.
You can hear me now, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, all aspects of these obviously lead to a very high-performing team as such, as we can see. But I suppose, Atif, what you've done here is you've sort of given us the kind of prerequisites that a middle leader may want to adopt before they think about progressing onto senior leadership in a school. Is that right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it's limited just to senior to middle leaders. I think it kind of goes all the way through, and at any stage, you know, like so if you've got a Muslim school and it's not so large, this will still work. You might have 3 different positions in there, 3 different roles. It might be the head teacher, business manager, and might be someone else as well, or and a normal teacher. But this will all work within that because these are the characteristics of an effective SLT team. It isn't just about working in a school that is a secondary school. You know, we mentioned this before that, well, it doesn't really apply to me because I'm not in that situation. You are. They didn't do this research based upon just one type of school or one type of area in England or across the world, because it isn't just in England. It's been done abroad as well in America.
So I think the question then lends to Brother Atif, how do people, achieve this mindset where they can sort of engage in this high level thinking to become a leader of a team, to, empower people, to build, these high performing teams essentially? How do people do that?
Okay, so one of the issues that I used to have, I say I used to have it, I used to be in there with them, was when I had PGC students who had already done some, by the way, my PGC lecturing was all in primary, although I'm secondary trained. So I'd go into school and somebody would say, I'm really happy. I used to be a teaching assistant over here in this school, and now I've become a PGC student. I was like, that's brilliant. That's really good. You know all the processes of the school. And then they felt that they weren't making that jump over from being where they normally would sit in a classroom to now standing at the front and taking more of a predominant role. And it all came down to changing your mindset. And it comes on quite nicely into the next slide. The mindset is, Carol Dweck looked at mindset, and she was looking at the idea that, just looking at what the responses of children would be on failure. Excuse me. And they would say, what do you think failure is? And where does it come back from? And so there's a lot of investigation in that. And children kind of said, well, I'm just not good at maths, or I'm just not good at, it was mathematics, but I'm just not good at that. I'm not just good at whatever skill that you're asking me to develop, because I can't. This is as good as it gets. And Dwight said, well, actually, I'm not so sure about this, and kind of went on to this. And she coined this term mindset, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And I've shared a little image over here, because if you think that you can get better, and their image says smarter, but if you think that you can do better, and you know that the way to do it is, well, I can learn, and that's part of my goal because I'm going to self-develop, and I'm going to put a lot of effort in. And then if I do those 2 things, then I'm going to spend more time. And if I spend more time, then I'm going to do well at the end. I'm going to achieve. And you think, well, okay, and that does have a great effect. This just change your mindset has a great effect. We have this in Islam anyway. Like, we know that, if you're bad, like, the hadith about the person who killed 99 people. 99 people said, is there any forgiveness for me? And someone said, go to that wise person. He will answer and said, no, there is none. You killed 99 people. What do you think you're going to get off? So he's like, well, okay, well, I'll chop your head off as well then, because that's just the way it is. I'm a bit annoyed. So you can understand his mental state here. And then he asks again, and the other person says that, yes, there is. The idea that you can kind of come out of these constraints that you seem to put on yourself is massive, absolutely massive. It isn't just about education. It's about even like things like depression. People think that it's just not going to get better. Allah doesn't like me. I'm a dropout. I'm a failure. We sometimes put this into our children as well, just because the way that we talk. Speaking of which, actually, that was mentioned in Fisk, I think, is his work. The impact of mindset. So what happens if you have a fixed mindset and a growth mindset? So the question was whether they can be changed, and if so, how would it happen? So that's something that we've got to think about. So they did some work, Fisk did some work, and he looked at, if you praise a child, if you praise their intelligence, say, oh, it's really good, it's so clever. And we do that, it's like a normal phrase for us, or some of us, it is for me. If you do that, then you're going to end up having a really negative effect on the child, because what you're saying is that I'm talking about something that you don't have much control over. But if you were to talk and praise about their effort, which they do have control over, so you can't talk about the memory might be pretty much fixed. Some people have photographic memories and other people don't, but that doesn't mean that you can't do well. And at no point, I'd like someone to show me how Islamically, this has ever been an issue for us. It hasn't. We've never had this thinking, or we shouldn't have had this thinking. It still exists, though. When people then started praising the effort, the children started doing better. And by better here, I mean the amount of problems that they solved. So although you could say the numbers are pretty small, it's like 5, and then it goes to 6.5, that is quite an increase in a small period of time. When you do a question, sometimes you just know that I can't get past 20 questions, I can't get past 18 questions. This is now a significant increase in them in a short period of time. So the idea that children are now understanding that their intelligence is malleable, but also that they can do better, but the praise is always on the effort that they're going to make, then that does well. Fisk did some work in America, and they have exams and so on, the SAT kind of stuff. And they did some exams, and what he did was interesting. He didn't talk about the students, he spoke to the teachers. So he thought, well, I'm outside, I've got teachers in between me, and then you've got the children, so let me just go and talk to the teachers, and they'll have a greater impact, more than I could as a researcher. So he went and taught some teachers about the growth mindset. And if you look at the graph at the bottom, the 2012, 2013, 2014, at the beginning, it was static. There was no changes. 2013, the state average stayed pretty much static, but children were doing better. And then in 2014, they seem to have maintained that and done a little bit better again. I think it's only about a percentage point difference in there. And that's because the teachers were trained. What do you and I take away from this? That if we were to train our teachers, we're talking about the CPD thing that we spoke about earlier, if we can do that to our teams, and I'm not going to say staff, but teams, because I'm including parents into it and pupils as well, then the results are great. What do we want to measure? If we want to get great grades, or clearly the stats are in front of us. If we want them to kind of take risks and go outside of their comfort zone, that would also happen, because they feel that if they put in more effort, they'll do well. And Americans are quite good at this anyway. You might have heard them saying, "Good job, Johnny, good job," and they always say it's good because they're referring to the effort, even when the kid's not done very good at all. He's taking 3 swings of the bat and is struck out rather. They'll still say he's done well. We don't tend to do that over here. But there was a joke running around, and they said something about it's not a great joke, but some Asian parent says the child comes home and says, "Oh, mum, COVID-19." Someone says, "I think I've got COVID-19." And mum turns around and says, "Oh, you got COVID-19? Well, your cousin's got COVID-20." There's that competition thing. It's not about that. It's about trying to put the effort in and things that you can change.
Atif, we've just had a couple of individuals who've just commented. We've had Brother Ishan saying that Dweck also spoke about self-theory. And we've had Kubra who spoke about is about pushing children to the highest level as possible to find their true potential. And one of our colleagues has said that he's read something by Angela Duckworth on grit, and he's just given an insight into this. He says she gives a really good equation: talent times effort equals skill, skill times effort equals achievement. So your thoughts on this?
Very, very interesting. I quite like that formula stuff. I'm purposely not going to go into any one of these slides in too much detail, and that's intentional, because it's meant to make you aware of what's out there. We're trying to change our own mindset and not learn about growth mindset. So this isn't a session on growth mindset. It's a session on trying to improve ourselves and make sure that we are, the goal for our sentence, this session itself, is to become better leaders. And so this is part of becoming a better leader, changing our own mindset and making sure that we understand that things can change. And so the person who may not have been so great in the very beginning doesn't mean that they're going to stay that way all the way through.
Okay.
So if I haven't answered your question, but that is purposeful, but by all means stay behind afterwards, and I can certainly point you in the right direction if we don't have time.
Just to let you know as well, we're heading very fast to 6 o'clock. So
I know. I told you in the beginning it's going to go over. Anyone who knows me at parents' evening knows that for sure. Okay, so here's my next question, and if you've read it quickly because I put it on, think about it. If you haven't, let me read it out for you and explain it. When you walk into your institution, whatever that may be, do you feel that without you, the ship will sink. Do you think that that's going to happen? If you don't turn up to your department, do you think that they're not going to do well that day or for that week because you're ill? If you're the head teacher, do you think that everything's just going to collapse around you and no one's going to be able to do well? And I want us to think about that, because I would say at some stage I may have thought that about myself, that if I wasn't there, things were going to collapse. And alhamdulillah, you know, there have been times when I wasn't there and it didn't sink. And it made me think that actually the team around me is way better than even I thought. I thought they were good anyway. They were even better than that. And I know that they were that good because they've gone on and done great things themselves now. So I hate to break it to you, but I don't think it's going to sink without you. And if it's not going to sink without you, then why are we so possessive over whatever it is that we're trying to do? So delegation comes into this. Why do we want to hold all the ideas in our head? We're trying to we're trying to build capacity. I think we got a comment. Do we? Mona's raised her hand as well. You're on mute, by the way.
Yep, I know. Okay, I'm just going to unmute Khala Mona. I know exactly who this is. Khala Mona, you are now on unmute. Go ahead, please, Khala. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, everyone. It's just the question is fantastic question. I think long time ago when I became a leader, I used to think I was very persistent about my position, about, oh my God, if I didn't go to school one day, the school will collapse. And you know, I've been in this job for over 30 years, and then you realize, you see, no, it's not. Actually, successful leadership is that when you're not there, the ship will sail, and it will sail successfully. And that's, you talked about Atif earlier about delegation and distributed leadership. This is why we're all leaders in our own positions. If a head teacher is not in the school there, honestly, I think a teacher is a part of the team, is a figure to inspire people and make sure that they obviously part of the team and things are moving on. But if you're not there, nothing will happen, I think. I've run 3 schools. I'm a head of 1 and executive of 2. And that was a very scary position for me a few years ago. Oh my God, how can I let go of my baby girl's high school? If I go to the other 2 schools, the school will collapse. And actually the school is more successful than it was before. We created leaders among leaders, and then we're all leaders. And I think it's a beautiful way of developing our leadership. Thank you, Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. So from what I remember about Khala Mona, she is the principal for Manchester Islamic High School for Girls. So I didn't know you had progressed on to becoming an executive principal, Khala. Well done.
Yeah, for the Muslim prep school and for the KD Grammar School for Boys. But honestly, it's a fantastic. It's a challenging role. Developed my own. I've learned a lot. I'm still learning from my own colleagues. Honestly, still areas that developing is fabulous. So I think we need to take risks and not to be scared. That's very important.
I think what I need to do is getting you on next time and doing another session. I think that's what.
No. I want to this. Thank you. It's lovely listening to the brother. Honestly, it's very, very reflective listening to you, brother Atif.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Nice to see you, Shuaib, by the way.
Nice work. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, brother Atif. Sorry. Yes, that was some good insight into.
I just want to say that it's fabulous when you hear of people who've been in the game for a lot longer than we have, and mashallah, they did absolutely wonderful stuff. Testament, right? I know Sister Mona to some degree. We've been on a trip together, and if I you've got to think about this. Is a person who is an executive head, why on earth would she be sitting over here and listening to me? I'm nowhere near on that caliber. But the idea that is in her mind, at least, is that you can take knowledge, and if you take knowledge, and you can do it, and you're always growing and you're always learning, then you will do better. And one of the things that I found whilst I'm attending lectures, certainly at universities and so on, is some of the really, really top guys. Like, these people are really good. They're top of the game. You sit amongst them, and they lend you their ear as if you're the person who knows more than they. I'm laughing to myself, thinking, why do you even care what comes out of my mouth? Because you're the person who knows everything. I'm here to learn from you. But they don't. They give you that ownership of your own ideas. and a safe space to be able to speak about them. Coming back to the sinking ship part, everyone is a leader, and I think Sister Mona has already mentioned that. Everyone is a leader. You may be leading a larger group, but then the assistant head has got the people under them, and then they're responsible for, and then a teacher on their own is responsible in the smallest capacity of 30 or so children that they have. And so you're a leader, and the child themselves is a leader amongst themselves, of themselves. We've got the hadith about every one of you is I think a leader, and everyone has a flock. Something along those lines. Correct me if you know the hadith better than that. So there is leadership along the ranks all the way through. It won't sink. The situation won't become a disaster. But I'm not naive to think that that never happens. It does. It can happen if you've got some people who are, and they possess characteristics, for instance, that are, for whatever reasons, they just don't seem to care at the moment in time. They have other things going on outside of work. They're just disillusioned with the career at the moment in time, and so they don't want to put in the effort that they would have done once many years ago. And so if you give it to them, they're like, who cares? I don't really care if they don't do well. If the kids don't do well, whatever. I remember watching Waterloo Road many years back, and there was one of the teachers who used to sit there and with a newspaper in front of him, put his feet up on the table. That person obviously didn't care. And if you've got those kind of people around you immediately, then yeah, I think that the ship might sink from where it is. It might not completely go down to the bottom of the ocean, but it might kind of come down a little bit. And then, inshallah, when you give responsibility to people, they tend to rise to the occasion. So I think that's part of it as well.
Mashallah.
If we're going to mentor, so we're understanding the idea that it's not going to, the ship doesn't sink, and we can then make improvements on people, develop them as well as ourselves. Then how do we go about this? Now, I know that this research, Chemist et al. In 2014, spoke about mentoring new teachers. So we're talking about NQTs, or pre-service teachers in America. And they said that there are three architectures, three different types of mentorship. So the first one is supervision, assisting new teachers to pass through probation. So you've got an NQT person, wants to get through the year, got 3 or so observations at minimum, 6 potentially, and just wants to get through. That's the supervision that person gets is very much drilled for getting through the probation. Then you've got the supportive type, which is where an experienced teacher is assisting their mentee. I think this is generally where most of our mentoring seems to occur. And then you've got the collaborative self-development one. This is professional growth through collegial, so people working together, not necessarily the same kind of level. They could be higher or lower in the hierarchy of schools, but they work together. And the key difference here between collaborative and support is that both parties are learning. And I want you to think about that for yourselves. Which one would we do when we get asked about mentoring someone? If we have PGC students coming in, for instance, is the mentor being supportive, or are they being collaborative? And in the best schools, they love having PGC students in because they think that they bring something new and exciting, and they refer to themselves as all boring. And I've seen them, and they're not boring at all. But they put it up. They're just humble people, but they're learning from each other. Whereas the supportive one is like, I am the giver of information. I'm the more knowledgeable one. I'm going to depart information onto you. Have a think about which one you are, and I hope that we're more of the latter. I put that at the bottom because I really do hope that we're more of the latter. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster because I know we already have time, and I know that Shoaib's going to kill me anyway. Okay, so when we look at this is more the stuff that I'm doing at the moment in my thesis is, and I mentioned this earlier. So when we look at PISA results, PISA is an international comparative test that lots of teachers, lots of schools, lots of countries rather have to pay to get in. So you have to pay. There's I think £500,000 it was before. And they come up with this standardized test, and they translate in different languages, and they give it out to people, and they check. And this is how we say that, oh, Finland's doing really, really well, or China's doing really well, or within China, Shanghai's doing really well, Singapore's maths is great. This is because of the PISA tests that they all seem to sit. So when grades are measured, the effects of comparative tests become really important, and it has an effect on policies. But I'm going to skip all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to focus on the Japanese model of lesson study. And this is where they come together to do something. So it isn't just one person's mind being used. They say the 2 heads are better than 1. They've really taken that to heart. And so they do better at this. They come up with some planning. They will assess it, and then they'll teach it, and they'll keep going through this circle. And it consists of different people. The hubs in UK that are somewhat modeled on what happens in China are somewhat doing that. I know that when I was a lecturer, people were asking us to get involved as well, because they had practitioners, they had people on the front line, and they had a little bit of ITT personnel, and they had very, very, very few lecturers in. And so there was just a very, it wasn't a very dynamic set of information coming out to share amongst everyone else. And this comes back to the diversity part, where if we've got diversity, then we can help everyone else. I'd like you to definitely take one thing out of all of this, especially when we talk about international comparative tests, is imitation is not possible. Do not for any moment in time, and there's lots and lots of literature on this, so ask me afterwards, where the idea that you can go into Finland and say what they do and bring it out, and then bring it over into England and say that's going to work. It's a very different setup. Just on a basic level, you can look at the diversity, and now I am referring to race, in London, for instance, versus that in Finland. It isn't anywhere near the same. And when it comes down to their social structures, class levels, and the economic backgrounds of children, there isn't such a big gap as there is in London. So you can't just say, well, they don't have Ofsted. They all have they have lots of different people doing writing books. There's not just Pearson, for instance, or Oxford University Press and so on. They can pick whichever one they want to and teach. So you could have two teachers teaching two different books, because the aim isn't to just teach to that particular book and to that test. It's about getting information into their minds. They have the same teacher that lasts, I think, sometimes in 2 or 3 years. So there's lots of different things that they have that we don't, but you can't just take from there and put it over here. And the same goes for China. They give in primary school half an hour of homework every evening per subject. They have specialized teachers for mathematics even in primary. So how much are you going to change? You know, and it's to do with culture as well. I was in a master's class a while back, and we had this person. She was really bright. She came in as a scholarship student from China, and we would love debating. And anyone knows me, loves debating, so I just debate for the sake of it. So every time the lecturer would say something, I'd start debating it. And I turned to this person and say, come on, we're all kind of gearing up. There's only 12 people in the room. And she would say, very quiet. It's like, no. Whatever the lecturer says is correct. Whatever comes out of his mouth is just heavenly. And I was like, no, this is England. We don't do that. We just argue. And she didn't want to do it because culture was an aspect there. Even if she knew that the lecturer was saying something that's incorrect, they're not going to say anything. Not in that moment in time, not publicly. So culture plays a massive role in all of this as well. So key thing here, when looking at international comparative tests and what happens in other education systems, is don't imitate. Okay, so what do high-performing teams look like? So we're talking about how to build them. What do they look like? The first thing is that they are held together by a common set of beliefs, not common tasks. And remember, we talked about the teamwork versus the task work. So they have all got this shared ideology. And so it's very important for the leader to sit down, open conversations, and agree. So everyone has this common belief. And it might not be the one that you had in the beginning. So don't assume that it's just dissemination. It isn't. It is sharing. They're going to say something back to you. You're going to say something to them. And then you're going to formulate some common beliefs because you might be wrong. You know, that's acceptable. The second, these are characteristics again of what high performing teams do. Second is that they're made up of high performing individuals. So they are good. And we remember in one of the other research parts, we said that the composition is really important. So this is it. Composition does make a big difference. But they're committed on improvement and learning. So it isn't just about, well, I know the information, I'm just going to deliver. They are thinking about improvement for themselves as well. They don't seek glory for themselves, but it's the team glory. So it's not about them. It's not about number one. They want to do well, but they don't want, and you'll notice this even in conversations, they don't say, they won't use I did this, they'll always say a we, because it is a we, and they genuinely understand it. It's not just an act. Because you can't do it all on your own. If you were, for instance, if you're in secondary schools, and I'm going back to that because I can remember that being a more complex scenario. And in primary schools, we could think about, say, a 2 or 3 form entry school. How on earth are you going to teach across three different classrooms? You can't. And if you can't, and in a secondary school that's even bigger, you have 6 classrooms, 8 classrooms. If you're anything like the local school to me, and there's lots of more, there's like 16 or 18 form entry. You can't be in more than one place at any moment in time. It goes against the laws of physics. So what do? You've got to make sure that you've got other people doing work as well as they could, and you help them with it. And then at the end, when everyone does well, you don't say, well, it's all me, I did so well. So this is the bit when Shoaib was saying in the beginning that a successful run was made when I was head of department. The department did do well, but I emphasize that the department did well. The people that I worked with were absolutely amazing. I think they're more amazing now. And they're the people who helped. We had people who were NQTs. There's a couple of people in my mind that were NQTs at the time. And when they came in, they ran large parts of that department together with other members. And it wasn't like, oh, but this is not your remit. You're not a 2IC. It didn't seem to matter to them. They just did it. So it was very much about the team. The fourth is that you've got to have inspirational players who lead by example. Notice that as inspirational players, and it is not an inspirational leader. You don't have to be that person. So if you're on a team, football analogies again, you're on a football team and you've got Ronaldo, I choose him over Messi. You got Ronaldo there. You don't have to be Ronaldo. You could have Ronaldo on the team, and that's fine. You know, you could Maldini at the back and be a great defender. It isn't about you being everything, but you're just having someone who's inspirational and allow them the space to be inspirational. You also have to have clear objectives, and they are constantly reevaluated. So in the beginning of the year, you think something's not happening. One idea, an objective that you have has come up onto your agenda. It's there because it was paramount to the success of your team, whatever that's being measured. And halfway through, you find out that actually the goalposts have changed. You know, the government has changed things. I say that with a bit of a caveat, seeing that I'm working on a project with them, but they changed the goalpost slightly. What do you do? You just reevaluate and you change. So being able to adapt is really important. And the sixth, which was almost encompassing from Hargreaves and Harris, is that they had a professional learning community. So everyone's learning here. It isn't just about me disseminating information. I've mentioned this many times. And now I think hopefully at this point, looking at all the research that I've mentioned, you'll start thinking, actually, he keeps saying the same phrases. And I say the same phrases because they're constants amongst all of the research. So it is about sharing, delegating, not think about yourself. Everyone can improve, and that everyone learns. So suggestions on how we can go forward. You may remember Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a nuclear plant set place in the Russian states. And I'm going to think about 30 years or so, 34 years, I think, ago. If anyone's seen the BBC drama, jump in, because it was meant to be really, really good. A massive disaster occurred. A disaster so big that I think it had 7 times as much radioactive clouds around the area and floating in towards Europe. How did that nuclear disaster occur? It kind of begs disbelief. How did that happen? What you don't know, or what I certainly didn't know, was that the team itself, the nuclear scientists, were the best of the best, agreed best of the best. So you've got a team that is so good, and yet somehow still a disaster occurs. What does that say about us? You could have the perfect team. You yourself could be perfect. That doesn't necessarily mean that success is going to occur. And that's because it's Qadar Allah. Don't use Qadar Allah in the negative way. Well, hey, look, I don't try, I don't do anything, and then, it's Qadar Allah, it just didn't seem to work. No, you put in your effort, and then at the end, something doesn't work, not a problem. You can then reevaluate, change course, do better next time, and it's a learning process. So the suggestions that came up from this particular person in a psychology magazine was that first lesson, the initial setup counts. IBM, first four or so minutes of introductions is what seemed to kind of casted a cloud and set the precedent for the rest of the year and the way that the team was being perceived or people were being perceived. So it counts how you are going to come in. If you're going to go into a new job, a new leadership role, take that in mind. Keep that in mind. If you're in there already, use the pandemic being such a long period of time for people to forget how you were before. If you were the person, taskmaster, and you're cracking the whip, you come in as a new person completely, and you're all very much about sharing everything. And you have a personality. Personalities count for a lot. They mention many times Steve Jobs in Apple. And how his personality and his ideas seem to have carried on even when he's not around anymore. because it set the ethos of the company. So that would happen. The second part, lesson 2 that we can take is cooperation. Google has got this project, or run a project called Project Aristotle, and it was about team productivity. And the things that they said at the end, after talking to lots of different people and looking how well it works, is that shared belief, and I'll read it out, shared belief was held. The team was a safe place for people to take risks. So there wasn't an area where if you said something and you're gonna get shot down, you could say it. It might sound daft, you know. Many times I've heard people say, it might be a silly question, but you don't need to say that. You don't need to say that it's a silly question.
No question is a silly question.
There are no such silly questions. So ask. But you can only do that if the people around you have created that space. And so if you're a leader, look around you. Have you created that space? Even if there is a person who you may not get on well with, for whatever reasons, your character, your personalities seem to clash. At least give them that area where because they get paid for this job. They put in their hard work. Why are we shutting them down? Why are we using our authority and our position to not allow them to talk? That could be quite questionable, certainly on the day of judgment. And the next lesson is conflict. Now, conflict seems to have connotations. Everyone seems to think it's a bad thing. Actually, conflict is quite a good thing. But there is there's a point here. There's a side note here. Conflict allows differences to come up, and you're allowed to discuss them. And if I say, for instance, that I think that the best way, you hear this a lot when you're driving cars and you've got your partners in the car. It's like, I think the best way is to take the M1. No, the best way is not to take the M1. It's to take the A1 instead. So you don't have spending speed cameras, but you have a few traffic lights. And there's a disagreement on how to get from one place to another. The differences is what allows you to reflect upon what you're thinking, to make it better. If you can try to prove it to another person and bring them on board, then clearly you've got a really good strong point. And if you can't, and if they bring you across, brilliant. You're learning. Management is key. So you don't just open the doors and let everyone have a free for all. It's a brawl after every meeting. Management is really key. But conflict isn't a bad thing, and we shouldn't shy away from it. We should also understand that teams are very emotional. And there's a brother, really good brother that I know, called Keel in Qatar. And he used to be here. We used to work together for a short period of time. I had that pleasure. And he's now over there. And we were sitting in the car, and he was showing me around Qatar. We were going to another brother's house. And he spoke about this book that he was reading. And he said that the successes of relationships and marriages was about depositing making them emotional deposits, almost like a bank account, right? So when you go and you want to, on a normal daily basis, you kind of put something nice in there all the time. And I'll talk about how we do it, but you keep making deposits. And then there's the one time that it doesn't work. You had a fight. That's when you go in and you can take a deposit out. You can make a withdrawal, and it still is okay because we've still got lots of other deposits still in there. But you can't do it if it's empty. You're going to be going to minus. And at the moment's time, even lenders, I know the interest rates are low, but no one's really going to lend you anything at the moment. Marriages were seen to be, businesses, shall we say, required a 3.5 to 1 ratio of praise. Marriages require a little bit more, 5 to 1. I'm learning. And if you do, then the body releases, this is the biology stuff. So there's some scientists in there. I know Salim's a scientist, so he'll jump in. Oxytocin seems to be released and is linked to empathy and generosity. And I remember sitting in a khutbah with Asim Khan, and he mentioned the same thing about some research that was done about people being generous and how they felt, and versus people who were takers. So it's givers and takers thing. And people who were giving were feeling a lot better, even though you would think that's a bit contrary because you don't have much anymore. You keep giving it out, but it made them feel better. And the last bit is that adapting. We mentioned this bit earlier as well. Darwin suggests that it is not about the strongest species nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most adaptable. If you're very rigid, it isn't going to work because life is changing all the time. What I remember of schools, and certainly in the department that I remember well, that department doesn't exist in the way that it did. The children have changed. The school has changed. I remember the first place that I did my teaching practice was a school called Little Ilford. This is going back now. Little Ilford does not look like it used to when I was in there. It looks very, very different. It's a whole new building. It's set far back. So everything seems to change. If you're not going to be adaptable to the changes, then you're not going to be successful. I think kind of self-explanatory. I wanted to mention this, and this is a new part, the Islamic educational leadership. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there is lots and lots and lots of stuff out there Islamically about education. It isn't just about Ghazali, and it isn't just about a couple of other people that we hear a lot about. There are lots of other people. There's a really good book that I was reading, bring it over here, The Rise of Colleges and Institutions. This is not a bad book. It tells you very, very good detailed stuff about education in its enormity in Islam. And there are other books that are like great people like Sebastian Gunther in Germany, I think. And he's written lots of good stuff. So I think that we can take a lot from it. One of the people, there's three people I want to talk about here really quickly. And these people have come from what we known as the Golden Age. So Miskawi was a doctoral linguist born in Persia. And he suggested that his idea, and he's looking at educational leadership. Now, I know some of in this particular article, if you read Arar and Hajia here, 2017, you'll notice that the chap talks about, the authors, they talk about the opinions of these people and what they seem to have said, but relating to education as a whole. And I'm just taking bits out of what they've written. I think it's about a 12-page article in a journal. Ask and I'll happily send it over. But I'm talking about the leadership parts that he speaks about. And he says that studying Sharia to build morality, it's a very important thing that we should be teaching children, and certainly for ourselves. We can't teach them if we don't know it, right? But that's interesting, morality, so that's the underpinning of everything. We've got to be moral people. We're not trying to pull a fast one. We're not just going in there from the 9 to 3 job as those who are outside of education seem to think that we do. Mutual satisfaction. And when I mention these things, that these are quotes, just cast your mind back upon what the other researchers that I mentioned before have said. So mutual satisfaction in a harmonious collective between the teachers and students. So there should be this harmony between both people, not at each other's throats. He mentioned wearing white robes, and I thought this was quite nice because it's part of the standards, being good role models. He believed in cooperation, since people complement each other in their abilities and knowledge. So that's interesting, that you're working together, so that collaborative idea. Now, he doesn't use the same terminology every single time. Remember, this is a translation of the works that he has put down from Arabic into English. So if somebody hasn't translated it in an educational term, excuse it, but you get the picture here. Qabsi, I've forgotten his years actually, I forgot to put it down. Reminded teachers of the hadith that each one of you is responsible for those who are under their jurisdiction. And so we have to think about that as a leader. We are responsible for the people who are under us, responsible for them in many ways. If they're having a nervous breakdown because of the workload that's been put through or put on top of them, they may not be able to handle things as well as you can. You might have a knack for great time management. You don't put it all on to the end like I always tend to. Don't advise them, giving nasiha is a great thing, but don't do it in a way that isn't going to improve them. Do it in the same way that we would be mirrors and reflect upon each other, right? Samani said declaring goals of his teaching. We've seen this, putting aims in the beginning and objectives, and values or practice of knowledge in daily life. These are small snippets, and there's so much more I could put. We could do a whole session on this, of all the different people, and there are lots of different people who have mentioned education in an informal manner, and then we can take from that. And one thing that you'll notice, and I'm certainly noticing now, and I've spoken to Shoaib about this yesterday, is that it'll be nice to know, as educationists, we don't have to keep referring to the scholars of new that we have at the moment in time. We always seem to go to Piaget. We always seem to teach Piaget. Why? Because we're in England, and we're going to look at an Eurocentric set of education. So it's very much about Europe, because they don't know much about the Islamic side. Unfortunately, what's really bad on our end is that the Muslims don't seem to know much about their own history either. And what would be really, really good is if we could compile a book. I am putting this out to everyone. So if you feel you'd like to, certainly get in touch, compile a book and look at points that people have made from before. And we're going far back. I mean, this is like, 300 years after the Misakwi. He was 300 years after Hijrah, also, roughly speaking, putting down ideas of things that they've said, but we've got a buzzword for them now. Talk to your partner. and the objectives part. And there's, a few years back, I started making notes because every time I'd hear something, I think, oh my gosh, that's an idea that we teach in PGC courses at the moment in time. So that is pretty much the end of the, it is. That is the end of the slides. I'll bring the first one up because I know Shoaib asks for that to occur. There you go. I've learnt. But yeah, I hope that seems to help understand the idea that the team is a reflection of you, and you have to take that as a serious undertaking. That if it reflects you, how are we going to build people, and what are we going to do next? How do we go about making it successful? Every single one of us is able to do it. I don't want anyone to come away from this and think, oh gosh, this is too big, I'm not going to be able to do it. You can. There are many people around you that, you can speak to Sister Mona afterwards, and she'll tell you that there is definitely ways of doing it. It's just about changing the mindset, possibly in the very beginning, making dua. Don't lose that connection, because all of the golden age consistently refers back to Islam. And so make sure that as Muslims we keep that in mind, and then we try to improve ourselves, and in doing so we set good examples and lead from the front.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Atif. You've inspired quite a few, and unfortunately we have actually run out of time. We have gone over time, and unfortunately there is another meeting that is going to be taking place on the Neither account, so I very apologize if anyone has any questions. Unfortunately won't be able to address, but you have got a fellow, or sorry, not a fellow, somebody who's commented. Sister Amira said, Mr. Jaleel, you were actually my maths teacher when I was in year 9, about 8 to 9 years ago. This was incredibly useful. Thank you. This is Amira Tawuk. And Ehsan Amrit has said, thank you very much. Excellent sessions. And
I saw Amira's name last time and I thought, where have I seen that before? I've seen that on a class list. That's what I've seen it before.
Yeah.
So salam to you, Amira. It's good to hear from you again.
Okay, so just to let everyone know, we've got another session, inshallah, this Wednesday on the 10th of June 2020, starting at 5 o'clock with Brother Muhammad Arshad, who's going to be speaking to us about coaching and how to use coaching to influence change. I believe we're all overwhelmed by Brother Atif's presentation, and we're going to share this with everyone, not just the PowerPoint, but the YouTube video as well. And we're also going to ask everyone to please fill out the feedback forms, not just for today's session, but the last two before this one as well. And on that note, Brother Atif, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Can I just say something? If we have got questions, and I did say this to you yesterday, and I've clearly gone over, if you've got questions, get in touch. You can do so through Shoaib, or I'm not sure we're allowed to send emails and stuff like that out.
Yeah, we can. They've got the email address for the administrator. Please send us emails through to administrator, and inshallah I'll forward them on to Brother Atif, and we can sit down and inshallah go through them.
Brilliant.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brother Atif.
Take care.
Inshallah, see you soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.